What's going on YouTube? Florida Man Knives here with another unboxing video. I did already cut the sides, so let's go ahead and get this thing opened up all the way using my Spyderco Para 3 Lightweight and CPM S30V. And here we are. So I am very excited about this right here. It is going to be from Buck Knives, and this is going to be their June 2021 Buck of the Month. So if you are familiar, then you will definitely know what model this is. And I have always really wanted to get one of these for myself, and I will get into the details and reasoning behind that. The knife is definitely in this pouch, and then you can see it does come with a black leather sheath as well. There you are. And you can see that the sheath is actually made in Mexico, but the knife itself is 100% made in the USA. So I'm gonna go ahead and put that off to the side. And as I said, I have been wanting one of these for a long time for myself. This is going to be the Buck 110. And this one right here is going to be the, as I said, June 2021 Buck of the Month. Oh wow, that is really cool. So if you're familiar with the Buck 110, right off the bat, you're gonna notice a few different things here. It is going to have a Cerakoted thumb stud right there. Of course, you do have this satin finish blade, but this is going to be featuring CPM S30V. And then you do have OD Green G10 inlays right here for the scales. And then you do also have a brushed silver nickel bolsters on either side. Man, love that thumb stud right there. That is phenomenal. I mean, that really is, I guess the one negative of the original Buck 110 is that it was definitely difficult to open with one hand. And this, of course, solves the problem. And with it being a Buck of the Month, only 500 of these were made, which is really cool. If you watch the channel, you know that I love exclusive models. This is my second Buck of the Month. I did get the Buck Marksman from May 2021. But as I stated, oh wow, love the, sorry, just completely, a side comment here. This thumb stud right here acts as a great little thumb ramp too. Didn't even think about that. That is really comfortable in hand. Sorry, that is fantastic. I didn't even think about that. That is really unique. You can see right there, it is screwed in, tightened down, and this is Cerakoted, the thumb stud. As I said, brushed nickel silver bolsters, which is really nice. And I love the OD Green G10. Definitely going to be relatively grippy, pretty comparable to, the typical G10 that you would find on a Spyderco Paramilitary 2, for example. And yeah, this is just so phenomenal. I am so excited about this. Can't wait to use this thing and break it in more. If you're familiar with the Buck 110, it is a legendary knife, definitely one of the most influential folding knives of all time. It was actually originally created in 1963 by Al Buck, as he wanted to offer outdoorsmen a folding knife that would be a great alternative to fixed blades, something a little bit smaller, but definitely, just as stout and functional as a smaller fixed blade. So, really great history with the Buck 110. And as I'm discussing that history, I'm going to go ahead and bring out a vintage Buck 110, relatively speaking, that is, to this model. And this was my dad's that he actually carried while he was in the Navy. And this particular one was from 1988. You can see right there, that little mark next to the 110 is what that means. And this one is really cool. You can see this has the actual finger cutouts. This fits like a glove. I will say I do actually prefer the finger cutouts. Not by much. I mean, both handles are really comfortable, but it's just a little bit more unique with that. And then, of course, the original Buck 110s did have wood inlays and brass bolsters. You can see this one right here is definitely showing a nice patina. And this knife was really used a lot. As I said, when my dad was in the Navy in the late 80s, he actually used this thing as a hammer. And here we are all these years later. it is still a very sharp and fully functional knife. I mean, these things truly do last a lifetime. You know, the older vintage models are definitely a little bit more prized, and they're phenomenal, as you can see. I mean, this is just so cool right here. You know, one thing I guess that would be a difference is I'm sure that the old sheaths that are leather were also made in the USA as opposed to the new ones being imported, but that is really not something I'm going to be complaining about with this knife. That was to be expected for sure. You know, the fact that this knife right here was made in the USA is all that really matters. You can see that mark. And then one thing I really wanted to point out, if you're not familiar with Buck knives, you can see that symbol right there. That is for the Paul Boss heat treat. I mean, if you're not familiar with Paul Boss's heat treat, I mean, he is one of the leaders in the industry, an absolute expert. Definitely do some research on it, and you will find that the American-made Buck knives, they're just phenomenal. I mean, the edge retention and hardness and performance that you're going to get is typically going to be a little bit improved over, you know, some of the other brands, especially on their 440 and 420 steels. Again, this is going to be featuring S30V, which is really, really nice. I do know that you can get the Buck 110 in S30V on Buck's website and design your own. But as I said, this one right here is limited to 500 pieces for the June 2021 Buck of the Month. Really good fit and finish on the back lock. Not perfect, you can see right there, but I'm not going to complain at all. That is so cool. I love that thumb stud. I love it way more than I even expected I would. That is just so unique. This beautiful satin finish drop point blade. I love that blade shape. I love the hollow grind there. You are going to have a blade length of 3.75 inches. Your close length is going to be 4.875 inches. And then your blade thickness is actually going to be pretty slicey, coming in at 0.12 inches. So a little bit thinner than a Spyderco Paramilitary 2 if you are familiar with that knife, and not as much so with the Buck 110. And as I'm mentioning the PM2, may as well bring that out for size comparison, as I said, if you're not familiar. So the Buck 110 is going to be a little bit larger than the PM2, and definitely a little bit longer of a cutting edge. And to bring out the Para 3, which I opened this box up with, you can see, of course, it is going to be significantly smaller. And then one other quick Spyderco sandwich. We're going to bring out the Endura right here. And as I'm looking at it, I realize my Delica is currently with my girlfriend. She is carrying that right now. So I'm going to bring out a different knife just for reference. We've got the Spyderco Native 5 lightweight right here, also in teal, and definitely a smaller knife, as where the Endura is going to be very comparable on the cutting edge. I mean, virtually the same. And then the overall length is definitely going to be a little bit longer on the Endura, just with the overall handle shape. And that'd definitely be a great size comparison if you're familiar with Spydercos and not so much with the Buck 110. But man, I am just so excited about this. You know, with this thumb stud right here, you're not going to get a nail nick. So that is definitely, you know, something a little bit different that you will notice. This blade shape right here is obviously different on this vintage model. That is my dad's, and I will definitely be doing a review video of this knife. It is phenomenal, but I just wanted to bring it out here for comparison's sake to a newer version. Again, you know, this one does have the smooth handles without the actual finger grooves. It is a pin construction, as you can see, so you will not be disassembling this knife. Lockback design, as I stated. And man, I just am so happy to finally have a Buck 110 of my own. You know, I just have always loved the brand, you know, from Buck, and then specifically this knife. The 119, their fixed blade is another of my favorites, but this 110, you know, just the sentimental aspect of it, because my dad used one for so long and, you know, still has his today. I, as I've stated, have always wanted to own one of my own, and I finally do. You know, I love that this is basically a modern Buck 110 to the fullest extent, you know, with G10 as opposed to wood. I will admit, I much prefer the look of the wood scales, the wood inlays. But, you know, with this being an exclusive, I'm not going to complain. And I do love OD Green G10. Yeah, definitely one of my preferred colors of G10. I do actually really like the silver nickel bolsters for sure. Or nickel silver bolsters, there we go. Keep going back and forth on that when I'm saying it. You can actually see right there, caught it in the light for a second. Let's see if I can bring it back. That pin is right in there. Well, maybe I can't, but definitely pretty good fit and finish overall. A really nice looking knife. You know, the Cerakoted thumb stud I think is a great accent. I'll be interested to see how long that actually holds up over time, if it shows any wear. Pretty sharp indeed out of the box. Let's just check that. Curious, definitely shaving sharp without a doubt. I am just very, very happy with this knife, man. It has fulfilled my expectations. You know, there's been several 110s throughout the years that I have definitely wanted. You know, I love all of their special editions that they come out with, but a lot of those are going to be a little bit out of my price range, at least for what I would like to spend on a Buck 110. But I am definitely happy to get something a little bit more unique. It looks like the G10 has a little mark there, but I'm sure that'll rub out as I use this knife. And I love this thumb stud, the one-handed opening. As I'm looking at this more, you know, I did notice it, but really didn't acknowledge it, that this is definitely intended for right-handed opening. But I would be curious to know if you could unscrew that and flip it 180 if you are a lefty. I think that is a possibility, so I did want to point that out. Otherwise, I mean, you can use the thumb stud with your left hand, but it is definitely nowhere as easily accessible as it would be if it was on the proper side. You can see it definitely sticks out more. And there is, of course, this jimping right here, which is very, very nice and useful. I mean, you can see I have no issues engaging that at all. The blade centering on this one is pretty good. Not perfect, but not bad at all. And just checking the grind lines on it, pretty even for sure. You're not going to be getting a sharpening choil, but with this blade shape, you're not going to have any issues keeping this to a hair whittling edge for sure. And man, I just am so happy. And you can see right there, that little mark next to the Buck 110 is going to be designating this as a 2021 knife, which is really cool that Buck still does that. As I said, this one right here, that was my dad's, was from 1988, as seen by that symbol there. So you can see just a couple of changes they made. You know, the original Buck 110s were definitely engraved as far as the logo, made in the USA, the actual 110, as opposed to this being stamped on. So I'm sure this will last and hold up over time, but did want to point that out. And then, of course, you're not going to be featuring any blade steel marks here or Paul Boss heat treat on the vintage models like you will on these new ones. But man, as I keep saying, I'm so happy to finally have this in hand. The ergonomics are phenomenal. I do have extra large hands, but you know, with the blade shape, the handle shape, everything about it, I mean, it doesn't matter what size hands you have. Small, medium, large, extra large, massive hands, way bigger than mine even, you would definitely be able to use this knife. You can see you can grip up definitely way closer to the blade, choke up like that if need be, but the more natural position is going to fall right in between those bolsters. Again, just a legendary model, hands down one of the most important folding knives of all time, one of the most important knives of all time in my opinion. Just such a legendary piece, and I'm so happy to finally have one of my own, especially one of only 500 models, with this again being the Buck of the month. So I really would be curious to hear your comments on this particular knife. If any of you do have the Buck 110 yourselves, I also would be curious to know. And you know, which particular version do you have? You know, any handle scales or bolster options? Also, I do, you know, love that they switch up the handle shapes, as I have mentioned. And I don't need another Buck 110, but in addition to this one, I mean, you know, this is my first, but already I cannot guarantee that I will not be purchasing another one of these in the future. Just such a legendary knife, as I've said, and I just love when they come out with these exclusive variants or limited production or sprint runs, whatever you want to call them. It just is something really cool from Buck. You know, I love that they're doing that. They're, you know, they have been bringing out some new models that are made in the US, which is really pleasant. And of course, they can always fall back on their timeless pieces, you know, a lot of their fixed blades, but specifically the Buck 110 folder, in my opinion, is pretty much their flagship model. So I'm going to conclude this video. As I said, I would love to hear your comments on this knife, and I really appreciate everyone watching. And I just have to say real quick, if you don't have a Buck 110 in your collection and you are a knife collector, you know, let's be real, you don't need this many knives, or at least not as many as I own, but I highly recommend this. You know, the quality is still fantastic, and the Paul Boss heat treat is just phenomenal. I'm really excited to try out this S30V, and long term, we'll see how it holds up relative to some of the other brands out there. So thank you all so much for your support. Definitely like this video if you enjoyed it, and I hope everyone has a great rest of their day. Thanks.